All right, welcome back. We are beginning our fourth class here today on Scriptures, and we spent last class, as you may recall, looking at the first of the Allstars of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve. We're going to spend this class looking at the rest of the major characters that are in the book of Genesis. The interesting thing is that most of the stories that you know from the Old Testament are probably from Genesis, those Bible stories that you learned as a kid. A lot of those stories took place in the book of Genesis and not in the rest of the Old Testament. So we're going to look today then at some major stories here. And again, the All-Stars of Genesis, as I like to call them. We'll look at, obviously, last class we looked at Adam and Eve and creation and the fall and all those sorts of things, right? Now we're going to spend today looking at finishing out the book of Genesis with some major stories, right? We have Noah, we have Abraham. The father of our faith is what we refer to Abraham as. Then we're going to look at Abraham's son Isaac. We're going to look at Isaac's son Jacob, and we're going to look at Jacob's son Joseph. So from Adam and Eve all the way down to Joseph is the book of Genesis, and we get a lot done in those stories, right? And a lot of major things. And again, we looked at them probably when we were kids, but there's so much more that we can do and unpack as we look at all of those, and it's really important. So looking forward to doing that today. What we are talking about is we're going to basically skip over Noah and the flood. Noah and the flood is a beautiful story in the sense of giving us that image of how God saves humanity. Those who have virtue. So Noah had that virtue and was spared. And there's that beautiful image of the ark as well being like the church. Right? The church is the vessel in which all those that God has saved find refuge and take shelter in. And so Noah is always talked about by a lot of the church fathers in the ark as being a foreshadowing and a sign to come of the church. So we want to spend the last part of this class and the majority of this class looking at, again, these four generations in a row: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Okay? These four consecutive generations changed the course of the Old Testament and really set the stage for what's going to happen, of course, in the New Testament. So we have here, of course, Abraham, and then we have his son Isaac, and then Jacob and Joseph. So we're going to keep coming back to this and break down each of these men and talk about their story and what it has to do for us today and why it's so important that we know their story. So first of all, again, looking at this first guy, Abraham, who comes after Noah and the flood, way down the line. Okay, what happens is with Abraham, God comes to Abraham and approaches Abraham, and actually at the time his name was Abram when God first comes to him. So God gives Abram a new name. He says, "I will call you Abraham." Abraham, okay? And so this is important because it's the first of many people to get a new name for a new mission. Right? God changes Abram's name to Abraham because he has this new mission. And so God comes to him and says, "Go from your country to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." So there are three promises right there that we just mentioned that God gives to Abraham. Okay, so the first promise that God gives to Abraham is a new land. And this is so important that we remember these and know this and understand what God was saying to Abraham. I will give you three promises. He's making a covenant with Abraham. I will give you land. I will give you a new land, a promised land, right? I will make you a king. I will give you a kingship. So from you will come this amazing lineage of kingship, and you will be a king. And then finally, Abraham, you will be a blessing for all the nations. Okay? So that's a pretty big deal if you're talking about if God came to you and said that. I will give you land, I will make you a king, and I will allow you to be a blessing for all people. Right? Those are the promises that Abraham has made. And so with God. And so Abraham is really considered the father of our faith because it's the first person that God really approaches and says, in a way that was taken and run with. God made a covenant with Adam and Eve, right? God makes a covenant with Noah, but this covenant is really the start of where God is saying, I want to then make a people going forth from you that will flourish and that will be my chosen people. And so Abraham is the father of our faith. He's the father then really considered of the Jewish people in a sense as well. Okay? So we have Abraham. Now Abraham then, again, God calls Abraham out of his homeland and says, I want you to go to this land that I am going to give you and your descendants. So it's interesting. Abraham starts out in this town, in this place called the Ur. Ur is a name of a town over here in Babylon. This is actually modern-day Iraq. The Tigris and the Euphrates rivers coming down here into the Gulf, the Gulf of, I can't even think of it right now, but anyway, so that we have Iraq here. That's where Abraham is called from, and he travels across and up through the Euphrates and so forth into this area here, heads down through what's Damascus, modern-day Syria. He actually passes through the Promised Land and heads to Egypt before he then makes his way back and settles then finally in that Promised Land, in the land of Canaan, right? Which that is, of course, modern-day Israel. So we'll get to that in a second. We have the Red Sea down here, Mount Sinai. Abraham's people will eventually obviously go back to Egypt and be enslaved, but we'll get to that story in a minute. We're going to go one story at a time. So again, remembering, we have Adam and Eve, then we have Noah, then we have Abraham, and the start of something new with these promises. Abraham makes this journey, and so on and so forth, and settles. Abraham has a son. So we're going to look at the second person of these 4 generations in a row that really change everything. Abraham has a son, and his name is Isaac, right? And it's Abraham's only son, okay, at the moment. Okay, so the story of Isaac is really important, right? Isaac is Abraham's son, and part of this journey as Abraham is traveling, and actually when he was back in Canaan, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to take your son up this mountain, and I want you to sacrifice your son to me. And that's a story, if you're like me, that story stuck with me when I was a young kid. I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's crazy that God would do that, right? And so here we see a painting, an image of Abraham and his son Isaac heading up the mountain. Isaac carried the wood on his shoulders that would be used for this, that was maybe going to be used, what Abraham thought was going to be an altar, a sacrifice of his son, right? So Isaac carries the wood up the mountain. What's that remind you of? Who else carried wood up a mountain for their sacrifice, right? Jesus did that, right? So we'll get to that in a second. So we have Abraham, of course, then getting ready to sacrifice his son. But then, of course, we know an angel intervenes and God tells Abraham, I do not want you to do that. I don't ask you to do that. I don't want you to kill your son, obviously. And so, but that is, again, a story that sticks with us in a very vivid way. It confuses people, though, I think, at the same time. So let's address that first. Does God randomly ask crazy things of us, like go fly a plane into that building, the World Trade Center? Does God ask us to do crazy things? And so, of course, we have to first of all recognize that that's not what's going on here, right? That's not what's going on here. God tested Abraham and his faith, but God would never actually ask us to carry out something that was in any way an evil thing, right? It would be an evil thing to kill your son. God never asks us to actually do evil, right? So he was testing Abraham, and Abraham's faith then is what we should be taking away from this, that Abraham trusted that somehow God was going to do something, and that God was not going to actually will Abraham to do evil. But Abraham was ready to make that sacrifice. Abraham sacrificing his son, or at least preparing to offer his son as a sacrifice, is a foreshadowing of God the Father sacrificing his son Jesus. God literally gives his son Jesus to be sacrificed. Now Jesus chooses it, so God doesn't kill Jesus, so God isn't the one, stabbing his son, but God allows Jesus to be sacrificed, and the son allows himself to be sacrificed as well. So we have some very beautiful foreshadowings. Of course, as I said, we have the wood that was carried by Isaac just as Christ carries the wood of the cross. The location of where that sacrifice happens, the mountain in which Abraham and Isaac travel up, ends up being one of the mountains around Jerusalem where Jesus was actually killed. So we have that beautiful location in that Abraham offers his son in that exact same place, or very near that same place, where Jesus offers himself. The Son offers himself to the Father. Of course, sacrifice, that image, of course, of death, allowing that death to, there's always an element of sacrifice. And I think it's just an amazing thing to see. Abraham is offering his only son, just as the Father offers his only son. Okay, so we have Abraham who gets the call and travels and leaves his home and goes to the promised land. Isaac, the son, while this is all happening, of course, is also then that powerful story of sacrifice. The son of Isaac has a couple of sons, Jacob and Esau, of course, that we remember, right, perhaps. So now we're going to go in and look a little bit closer at the third generation of this family. Abraham, Isaac, now we have Jacob, okay? So Jacob, you may recall, when Jacob and Esau are born, there's that whole story where Jacob tries, it deceives his father and wins the inheritance from his brother Esau. They didn't get along. They were born at the same time, so on and so forth. They later make up. Of course, they reconcile each other. Just as Abram's name was changed to Abraham, so Jacob has his name changed at one point to Israel. Okay? Again, a new mission. Who else, just really quickly about this name thing, who else, can you think of other people that have their name changed when it's time to receive a new mission? There are a lot of other people in the Bible that have that happen to them. But also, we have monks and nuns and sisters a lot of times, brothers and sisters who vow in religious life. They have their name changed too, right? Because again, they, in the same way, have a new mission. The popes have new names. They take a new name when they are elected and nominated to be pope, right? Again, a sign that I have a new mission now. I need a new name because I have a new mission, right? Father, priests take on new name. They get that name Father as part of their new name when they are moving forward. When you're confirmed, you get a new name, right? So you are confirmed, you choose another name, a saint name, because when you're confirmed, you now have this new mission, to live out your faith in a more public way. Right? So we have this beautiful thought, this beautiful imagery of getting new names. But anyways, Jacob, just like his grandfather Abraham, Jacob has his name changed to Israel as well. Okay? So we're just going to that's about really all that we're going to say about Jacob, because we want to spend the last part of this class looking at the fourth generation of this really important family in the book of Genesis. Joseph. Joseph takes us to the end of the book of Genesis, right? Now, Joseph, of course, we remember as one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Jacob has these 12 sons: Gad, Asher, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin, right? Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Israel, who these sons each become the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob. Okay, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So these, you hear sometimes the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the 12 tribes. They each took their name after one of the brothers of Israel. Okay, so Israel has 12 sons. One of them was Joseph. And Joseph was the favorite of the 12 sons of Jacob, of Israel. Okay, he was the favorite son. He was the second youngest. You may recall the story, of course, that we grew up with, which was the coat of many colors. Jacob, as a sign of his love for Joseph, gave him a great gift, which was a great gift of luxury and so forth, and he gave him the coat of many colors, right? And again, a lot of his brothers get jealous about that, right? And Joseph's kind of walking around. Joseph knows he's the favorite, which we all have those family members or our friends who sometimes get a little bit aloof and arrogant, and we kind of get fed up with that, right? We don't like people who walk around thinking they're special all the time. So, but unfortunately, his brothers obviously take that too far. And in one story, Joseph comes to bring them some stuff when they're out in the fields, and they throw him into a pit. And they tell Jacob, his dad, the brothers go back and tell Jacob, the father, Israel, right? They say, Dad, he got killed. He was killed by a lion, and they show him the bloody cloak and all that sort of thing, right? But in fact, he's down in the bottom of this well. Now, the brothers are like, okay, well, how are we going to get rid of the body? How are we going to get rid of Joseph? So they find some people who are coming caravan, and they sell Joseph into basically slavery, and they ask them to take them. Now these people then take Joseph to Egypt, right? They take him to Egypt, which of course then Joseph becomes really high up in the government of Egypt, and the brothers very beautifully have to eventually come back. They have to go to Egypt because of a famine. They have to get bread they don't realize it at the time, but of course Joseph ends up saying, I am your brother, and he is able to feed them with the bread, and ends up the brothers bring their father back to Egypt, and Israel and the 12 brothers and Joseph all live and prosper there in the land of Egypt. So it's a very beautiful story that ends that book of Exodus. So again, just as Israel, just as Abraham, just as Isaac show us some imagery of Christ, so the fourth generation in that family, Joseph, shows us some very beautiful imagery of Christ as well. Joseph is betrayed by his family, just like Jesus was betrayed by his close confidant Judas, right, for just a really small sum of money. In the same way, Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. Joseph is of course seen as dying by going down into the pit and by being sent off into Egypt. It is a type of death, right? He doesn't actually die, of course, but just as Jesus literally dies, so Joseph being sent off is in a sense Joseph is dying. But in dying and being sent off, Joseph then is able to save his family through giving them the bread, right? Through giving them what they need to survive the famine. Just as Jesus literally dies and is able to save us through giving us the bread of life through resurrection and so forth, right? So, a couple final comments. A couple of things that we might say, why do we have all these stories, these Bible stories from the book of Genesis? We'll get next to the book of Moses, right, with the Exodus out of Egypt. But some people might ask this question, why all the drama? Why do we have to have all these stories? Why couldn't God just send Jesus, like right after Adam, right? So Adam messes up, so then God sends Jesus, right? Why don't we have that? Just send Jesus. First of all, I think one thing that we can say about that is there is a difference between somebody giving you a gift right away, just giving you a quick gift and fixing the problem right away and so on and so forth, is kind of like versus a gift, I should say, that was planned over the course of many years. If somebody has been planning a gift and adding to that gift for you, and you are allowed to kind of see how that unfolds, there's a real beauty when someone, like let's say someone did some sort of art project or took a picture of you every day or wrote a letter for you every day for the year, right? When you got a gift like that or something that somebody really worked hard on to give you, that's really, you're moved by that, right? You're really, in a good way, you're like, wow, that's an amazing gift. Versus somebody who goes on Christmas Eve, right? I was shopping for some groceries, and there was a ton of people on Christmas Eve who were in line buying gift cards, right? And I'm like, that's nice to get a gift card, but it's not the same as a gift that somebody has made or somebody has crafted, has spent time on, right? And so there's just a beauty to the way that all of this happens. We see the plan of God unfold over many, 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 many generations, thousands of years, right? And there's a real beauty to that, to see that God has been working and hatching this plan and sending us all this love over time, right? And so God could have fixed things right after Adam and Eve, but there is, hopefully, as we look back at these scriptures through this class, we'll start to see, wow, God was working on this plan. It has this plan to save us, and it happened over time, and there's a beauty to that. So I hope we see that. And also in that unfolding over time, there's also this way in which God reveals himself to us in ways that we can learn about him, right? So we learn about God through Abraham and through his interactions with Abraham, through Isaac, through Noah, through Adam and Eve, through Exodus. We learn more and more things about God in a way that we can only know them through time. A husband and wife can get married, but the only way that they really learn about each other is going to be over the course of time, right? You can't know everything about a person right away. Even if you love them, and even if you're married and you're willing to promise yourself, it just takes time, right? And so in the same way, over time, God reveals himself to us so we get to know who God is. God could have, again, like I said, God could have rode in on a horse and said, that's it, I save everybody, Adam messed up, now I'm here to fix things, I'm Jesus, this is who I am, here's a book, read it. But there's that beauty in that it's unfolding over time. And I just hope we get to see that, hope we appreciate that, and allow God to, allow ourselves to be impressed by the beautiful artwork that God has made, this masterpiece that God reveals to us over time, right? In the same way I was saying, part of the fun of dating is slowly getting to know a person more and more, right? And we learn about God slowly over time. Finally, God shows us over and over again how he can use evil to bring about good, right? God shows us over and over. So throughout these stories of the Old Testament, we see a God who loves us and never wills evil. God does not desire evil, okay? God brings good out of evil. So God doesn't want Joseph to be sold into slavery. God doesn't want that to happen. But when it happens, God uses it to bring good out of evil. So we learn that really important element about God as we see all of this play out throughout time. How God works, how God takes evil scenarios and situations and brings good out of them, right? So when Jesus finally does come, we know, if we've been paying attention, we know a ton about the Father. And we know then, and what Christ does makes sense, and we can see, oh my gosh, that's just like what happened with Isaac. That's just like what happened in the church, is just like Noah in the ark, right? And all these things. And Adam, took an apple off of the tree, but then Christ dies on a tree and saves us. There's all this beauty and imagery there that's just so important. So I just wanted to kind of comment on that. So hopefully, again, these classes help us appreciate more fully what's taking place with Christ in the New Testament. So, for your questions, name the Allstars of the Old Testament so far that we've talked about. So the book of Genesis, name the Allstars that I was telling you about that we've looked at last class and this class. Second question, who were the 4 men from 4 successive generations from the same family in the Old Testament that dramatically changed the course of human history? So we talked about those 4 generations in a row. Who were they? Number 3, how was Isaac like Christ? How was the story of Isaac, how is that like Christ? And what is some of the imagery there that should remind us of Christ? The 4th question, how was Joseph in the story of the coats and the slavery and him being sent to Egypt but then being able to save his family? How was that? How was Joseph's story like Christ? Okay. Number 5, does God force evil to happen? Does God force evil to happen? Number 6, why are names changed at times in the Bible? Why are people's names changed in the Bible? Why does God say, you used to be called this, now I'm going to call you that? And the final question, if you could change your name to something new, signifying a new mission, what would your new name be? Okay? So if you could change your name, what would that new name be? All right? So hopefully today you have some things to take away from that as we finish up the book of Genesis. Maybe hopefully a little bit more mature look at some of those stories that you learned when you were a young person from those stories. Maybe now hopefully getting to learn a little bit more deeper about what's going on in those. So get those questions to me whenever you're able to, and I hope that you're doing well and that you're having a great time, that you're praying, that you're going to Mass, that you're getting ready for Lent, that you're going to the Sacrament of Confession, and that you're just staying close to God and to the Bible and so forth. Look forward to being with you next class. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.